The Ag Tribes Report is brought to you by Farm Test, a field trial design, execution, and analysis service that makes it easy to ask your fields which management practices perform best. To start your field trials, visit farmtest.ag. And Legacy Interviews, a service that video records individuals and couples telling their life stories so that future generations have the opportunity to know their family history. To learn more, visit legacyinterviews.com. Welcome to the Ag Tribes Report, a breakdown of the top stories affecting the culture of agriculture, with your host, Vance Crowe. The report begins in 3, 2, 1. Let's begin.
Welcome to the Ag Tribes Report. I'm your host, Vance Crowe. Each week I bring a co-host to represent the perspectives of one of the many ag tribes that collectively make up U.S. agriculture. This week I am joined by Tyne Morgan, host of the U.S. Farm Report, a leading agricultural television show which airs weekly on Saturdays. Tyne just returned from the Pro Farmer Crop Tour, so we hope she brings a lot of her up-to-the-minute knowledge today. Welcome, Tyne.
Thanks, Vance. I'm thrilled to be here. Excited to finally be invited. I appreciate it.
Well, today we are going to be covering the Canadian rail strike. What happened last week that's kept those that got those trains rolling. We're going to discuss lease prices that solar companies are offering farmland in Illinois. We're going to discuss the latest with John Deere moving jobs to Mexico, specifically that Senator Marco Rubio had a pretty coarse letter that he sent to him. And finally, we're going to have a little bit of a conversation about consumer perceptions about why food prices are going up and what their politicians can do about it. Of course, we will also review Tyne's Peter Thiel paradox, where we hear one thing she believes that almost nobody agrees with her on. And if she is willing, we're going to try and get her to name a worthy adversary out there in ag. So are you ready to jump right in, Tyne?
I am ready, Vance.
Okay, the headline that we've got to start with this week is Canada rail strike averted after a short disruption. And the question becomes, is U.S. in danger of striking again? So listeners from last week will remember that there wasn't a lot of U.S. media coverage on this, but if you were listening to people like Sean Haney up in Canada, Real Agriculture, they were talking nonstop for weeks about the rail strike, and they did end up having a lockout. That lockout happened on Friday. But by Monday, the Canadian rail operators were mandated to go to binding arbitration between the carriers and the union. And ultimately, the companies said, hey, on 12:01 a.m. on Monday, August 26th, they returned to work, and employees did as well. So, Tyne, it was big news up in Canada. When you were looking around, did you see much of this hitting U.S. airwaves?
Not much outside of ag. I think look back to a couple years ago in the U.S. when we were fearful of that rail strike here, and we were covering it for months. But similar to the U.S. and Canada, these rail carriers, they slowed and even stopped shipments in anticipation for that strike to happen. And so I think that's what we have to remember, that even though it was short-lived, even though we had that rail stoppage, I forget how many hours that it actually lasted, but these carriers slowed their shipments. And you think about how much of product in Canada is actually shipped via rail. Think specifically fertilizer. Chip Flory, I had him, host of AgriTalk, I had him on the show for this weekend. And he talked about when you look at fertilizer production, it's in the middle of the country. It's not at the coast. It's not somewhere where maybe you could try to get it out via ship. You rely on rail. And what's interesting, Vance, is, in Canada, 90% of the commodities are trucked by rail, and 60% of the goods that the U.S. imports from Canada comes via rail. Rail is such a huge piece of the entire infrastructure and getting the goods where it needs to go. But with fertilizer, there's a lot of concern since Canada is such a big fertilizer producer. But Vance, even though they entered into arbitration, even though right now everybody thinks they're singing Kumbaya and we're going to move on and everything is good, it's not. These rail carriers have, these rail companies have said that they're going to file a suit, file in court. We're going to continue to see these challenged. And so I do not think this is over. Even though the government stepped in and intervened, this is still tense up there.
I'm so glad you said that, because when I read CPKC, one of the rail lines up there, and when you read their statement about the going back to work, it was like, we're mandated to do this, we're
Yes.
required to do this, we
We
are
don't want to do
following
this.
orders. There was nothing in there like celebration. And so I read it and was like, this does not sound like it's a firm and solid thing. But I was also the one that was, hammering on, hey, this could be a big deal, this could be a big deal. And since they put him back to binding arbitration, it did just kind of go away. It didn't seem like it was that big of a deal. So I didn't want to, be Chicken Little crying that it was the sky is falling.
But it still could. And I think you're exactly right. That's the point. And even though, like I said, maybe the stoppage didn't last long, have we seen the impacts of that? I mean, it's going to take a while to work out some of these kinks. There was product loading up on some of these docks that wasn't being shipped. And so as you look, they're slowly coming back. I think it's going to take a while to work through it. But even here in the U.S., when we were on the verge of that rail strike and there was real concern heading into harvest of what impact that would have, I mean, just awful timing. I had quite a few folks in the rail industry. I live outside of Kansas City, and I had forgotten how many folks just around me are in the rail industry, not only working for some of these railroads, but work for some of these other businesses that rely on railroads. And these workers on the rail lines, they were saying, listen, I don't think you understand. We need change. We have not had substantial raises. We are on call all the time. It is not a family-friendly environment. I leave my family on the holidays. We are in the beck and call of them, and we're not, they're not thanking us for that in terms of pay and things like that. So even here in the U.S., I mean, I don't know if things got resolved, and what's going to happen down the road.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at what's going on with the U.S. side of rail, it's looking like October, there's going to be labor negotiations that open back up. And you're already, when I was looking around trying to dig about, hey, how is this going to impact things? It turns out shipping companies are already rerouting where their ships are coming into port in anticipation of even a small slowdown. Because like in Canada, every day they were offline, it's going to take 14 days to catch up, which is going to do all kinds of things to the pricing and how quick you're going to get stuff moving around. Any last words on the rail strike, Tyne?
No, it's just, I mean, something to keep an eye on, because I do think this is far from over. And Sean Haney does such a good job of reporting from Canada and the impact there. But we have to remember that so much of the goods that we import here, we rely on Canada for a lot, specifically in the fertilizer market. Vance, fertilizer prices, yeah, they've come down, but they have not come down at the same rate like corn prices have. And so they are still relatively high in comparison to that. And if we have one hiccup in the rail system that just throttles back supplies just a little bit, that is another factor to keep prices high or even higher than what we're seeing today. And that's a real pain point for producers. And Vance, I'm hearing farmers right now that are looking at what fertilizer, what can we cut back on? But if you listen to Josh Linville of Stone X Group, he's saying maybe you can cut back on one, or you think you can, but it's all commodities where prices are down right now as far as row crops go. And so it's not like you're going to switch from corn to soy. I just think even in the fertilizer market, I know it's been a while. We're not at the 2022 highs, but things aren't great. Prices are still high, and it's really pinching margins for producers.
Yeah, I think that's a great segue into, well, what else could you do if you don't have enough money for these inputs? And some farmers in Illinois are getting letters about, hey, maybe you want to put solar panels on these acres. So from AgWeb, they're reporting that $4,500 per acre plus a signing bonus. So solar companies are getting out there offering to lease the ground from farmers. And this was a story you sent my way. Tell me, what's going on? How are farmers reacting to hearing $4,500 an acre every year for 20 years?
Well, let me tell you how this story came about, because that was actually a story that I wrote, and that was a follow-up to a piece. So the Ag Economy Barometer from Purdue and CME Group, Purdue does a great job of surveying producers, getting sentiment, seeing where their head is, but also asking some off-the-wall type of questions about like, hey, have you been approached about solar leasing? Have you signed solar leases? Anyway, so the information from Purdue, and I don't have the exact stats in front of me, but showed that the majority of producers were being offered $1,000 per acre or more. And I thought, my gosh. And I first got rumblings of this, I guess it was last winter when I was at some farm meetings, some agricultural meetings. I heard from some producers in Missouri that were saying that they are getting approached heavily. I heard from some producers in Iowa, some producers really in Illinois and Ohio is where I heard quite a bit more of this. And so I started digging. And then when I saw those Purdue numbers, I thought $1,000 per acre. I wrote a story on $600 per acre cash rent. And I swear that some of these farmers wanted to do off with my head, because they sent a note to Ken Ferry, one of his clients, and said, Ken, Will you tell her to quit writing about this? $600 cash rent. We don't want this getting out. This is ridiculous. Not all of us are paying that. So we thought $600 per acre cash rent was bad, right? $1,000. I'm thinking, my gosh, this is mind blowing. And I'm wondering, okay, where did this money come from? Well, then I get a text from a farmer in Illinois who had got my number from another farmer. And he said, Tyne, I'm not saying that what you reported was false. I know you're reporting Purdue University's numbers, but I'm just telling you $1,000 is too low. And I said, okay, how low? And he said, well, ours is about $3,000 per acre. And I'm thinking, that is just mind blowing. So then a couple weeks later, he texts me and he said, hey, one of my neighbors just got an unsolicited offer. And this is outside of Morton, Illinois. Okay. Good farm country. Just outside of Morton, Illinois. And the price that he received, this unsolicited offer in the mail, $3,200 to $4,500 per acre, plus signing bonus. When you sign the letter of intent, I think you get like $1,000. And then when you actually sign the lease, you get $3,000. And Vance, I mean, one thing you have to remember is this is not a short-term contract. Also, what you have to remember is there's no guarantee. Even if this is a 30-year contract, there's no guarantee that these companies are going to be around for 30 years. However, when you think about where margins are today, how can you blame producers? Whether you agree with this concept, whether you agree with the Inflation Reduction Act and what the Biden administration is doing or you don't, you look at simple economics today and you can't pass that up. And so, one thing I did notice on Crop Tour last week, Vance, was the number of solar panels that are going in Illinois. I've traveled Illinois. I mean, I've been doing Crop Tour since 2012, since the drought of 2012. I've traveled Illinois most of those years. I have never seen so many solar panels, not only in production and up and running, but ones being put in. I mean, I made our videographers pull off to the side of the road. We were rushing to an interview. I said, I'm sorry, we've got to pull over and get video of this because I talk about it all the time, the number of solar panels going in, and this was a huge solar farm that was being built while we were going by. And so, there's some question marks. Okay, how much farmland are we actually going to see go into solar? And everyone you ask, no one has a straight answer. Everyone's different. But the Department of Energy says that just 0.3% of farmland will be used for solar energy by 2035. Okay, that's what the Department of Energy says. Farmlandinfo.org estimates that solar could be deployed on over 7 million acres by 2040 to meet the goal set by the administration. And then you have some others. The American Farmland Trust estimates that 83% of new solar energy development is likely to be placed on farmland. So, my question is, Vance, why farmland? I mean, you look at some of these airports and all these parking facilities where you could put these on roofs. I mean, you look at some of these cities and solar panels that could go on roofs. Not only why farmland, but why highly productive farmland? Why Illinois?
That's, my point exactly. The first time I saw a huge solar farm was in Springfield, outside of Springfield, Illinois. Yep. This is some of the blackest, greatest soil you have. And it's not like, we just put those panels up and underneath everything can graze. Vilsack was questioned by Chip Flora, you mentioned in your article. The only way you're grazing underneath that is if you hang them 10 feet up in the air. And even then, when you look at these farms, you see gravel all over the place. They're putting roads in. This is farmland that once it goes out, maybe you could bring it back in, but it will never be what it was.
Well, and Vance, in some of these, when you look at the Department of Energy and some of these plans that the administration has put out, and it's documented on the website, they talk about, it's going to be space where it's safe for the environment, safe for animals. But yet you're saying now we want you to graze livestock underneath these? I mean, there's just so much research that needs to go into it. You look at the opportunity right now for farmers, and you cannot deny that if you get offered something like this, there is a huge financial incentive. And so you see that.
But the only way this bubble is happening is because the government is pumping that money in there. So they're using, 50% of the construction fee is coming from the Inflation Reduction Act. This is not a real market. It's a bubble created by the government.
Well, and that's the problem is, less government intervention, not more, when you think about some of these things. And right now, when they're stepping in, that's the only way that this ship is sailing is because of that. And that was I had Chip said he was interviewing Secretary Vilsack. And so we don't interview him often. But when we do, we try to, get together. Okay, what questions do you want answered? I said, I have one question. Who is paying for these solar panels? That is my question, because I assumed that it was coming from some of these government programs, and they are proud of it because of the opportunities that they say that it's presenting to farmers. And I totally understand that. But at the same time, 90% of the funds are coming from the Inflation Reduction Act. So, I mean, at the end of the day, you and I are the ones that are paying for this. Are we benefiting from lower energy bills at home? I know we're not here. So.
And nothing's better off by getting rid of our national treasure, which is our farmland. All right, moving on, continuing to talk about kind of some government intervention. Senator Marco Rubio writes a letter to John Deere, an open letter, chiding them for moving jobs from the United States to Mexico. In his letter, Rubio said, I write to remind you of your company's duty to your workers, their families, the communities in which you live, the nation which you call home, your hardworking customers, and your shareholders. I'm concerned by recent reports that John Deere has engaged in mass layoffs of American workers at your facilities in Illinois and Iowa while simultaneously shifting manufacturing to Mexico. So my question to you, Tyne, you got a senator from Florida that is wagging his finger at a business in Illinois during an economic downturn. What do you think? Should he be doing this?
Well, what's interesting is, you would expect this to come from a senator in Iowa or Illinois, in one of these areas that have seen the manufacturing jobs be impacted by some of these layoffs. And it's not just John Deere. When we talk about these layoffs, it's CNH. It's there's a lot of other equipment manufacturers, a lot of other ones that are making some of these cuts. John Deere has been the one that has hit the headlines because they have a lot of workers, and they've trimmed. I think it was close to 2,000 of their production workforce that they laid off. So Corey Reed, who is the president of the Ag division, Vance, he actually came down to Lenexa, our studios in Lenexa, and did a one-on-one. I guess this was a few weeks ago, right after kind of the salaried workforce cuts were announced as well. And I asked him that. I mean, because one of the biggest criticisms that John Deere has had is, if you look on social media, and it's DEI is one, the other one has been them and the decision to move jobs to Mexico. And so I asked that since they've been catching so much backlash. And according to Reed, John Deere's production site in Mexico has actually been in operation for nearly 70 years. And he says that actually they make these announcements. I mean, this happens. They shuffle production around. So this has happened for quite some time. Like I said, for 70 years, they've had this production site. I mean, right now it's catching a lot of headlines, but he did say that the cab production is what they're moving to Mexico, but right now what they're going to produce where the cab production line is those 9RXs. And so there is production being replaced there. These bigger, now, how many of these big 9RXs are they manufacturing right now, considering where commodity prices are? Not as much as tractor cabs. And so that's the reality of it. But his point was, we have had this business down there for 70 years. This is something that we do. It's standard operating procedure. But no matter what, Vance, when you look right now at former President Donald Trump, who's the Republican nominee, and J.D. Vance, they have made clear. J.D. Vance is from the Rust Belt. If most of you have probably read his background, very interesting, because he has seen the impact of taking some of this U.S.-based manufacturing, taking it out of his small community, and what it did. It basically killed the economy of the small community in the Rust Belt where he grew up. And so he is very adamant that he does not want to see any of these jobs move out of the U.S. So if it is the Trump-Vance ticket that is at the top in November, and they are the ones that get elected, I think you are going to see a lot more than just Senator Rubio, having these pointed letters and these pointed conversations with some of these companies. There's a lot of companies that are going to get a reality check, because it's more than just John Deere that's moving production to Mexico. And that's the reality of it. And I think, Vance, we have to step back right now and say, why are so many companies moving this production to Mexico? What is happening here in the U.S. that's incentivizing them to move to other countries for some of this production? And that's the bigger question that I think needs answered.
Yeah, and one of the people that is pointing this out is Robbie Starbuck. I talked about him on my podcast this week. We've talked about him on the Ag Tribes Report several times. He happened to hit the timing in the worst possible scenario for John Deere. He was hitting them with, look at all these DEI initiatives, and then they go to do layoffs. So now every company in the United States that's looking at doing layoffs is looking at their DEI and saying, am I going to get blamed that I put money into these initiatives instead of making it so my workers were either more productive or not focused on these things? and they're going to have tough questions to answer.
Very tough questions to answer. But Vance, I'm telling you, when I was reporting on John Deere and we had that exclusive interview, my one goal was to not have an article tweeted by Robbie Starbuck. I can tell you that right now, because the backlash to any of the articles that he posts, it is ugly. It's one of those where I would not have wanted to read the comments. And I tried to be as middle of the road as possible. And I was asking, John Deere questions like Corey Reed. I asked him questions like, are you going to cut the price of equipment? What are some of the, what's your plan? And so, we try to be as middle of the road as possible and ask some of these questions. But Robbie has done some very interesting work. He has definitely sparked change. A lot of change with some of these companies. And you talk about someone who is making an impact. That is him.
Oh, yeah. I was talking to the president of a very large agriculture company just the other day, and I was like, you ever heard of him? And his face changed color. He's absolutely. All right. Final story I want to cover very quickly here, which is you sent this one to me. I thought it was a fascinating article from Farm Doc Daily. And they pose the question, lowering food prices. Do consumers think politicians are able to reduce costs? And the long and short of it is, people generally believe, more than 50% of the population believes, yes, politicians could lower prices. And the only one to do it is my political party. Almost all of them saying, if I'm a Republican, then I think only Republicans can do it. And if I'm a Democrat, I think Democrats can do it. Tyne, what do you think? Should people be waiting on the government to bring down the prices of their groceries?
Let's leave politics out of it. That's my biggest thing is when you look at commodity markets today, you look at anything, let the free market work. And that's what I do not you see the pain of commodity prices. If you want to, I guess I wish maybe they would have asked about inflation. What's causing inflation? And do you think one party is causing inflation more than another? Or maybe that is a separate topic, since inflation is such a hotbed topic right now. And there's a lot of finger pointing on what caused it, who caused it, and are we going to continue to see some of these prices run rampant? So we'll see what happens there. But yeah, I did think it was interesting. You can have your blinders on no matter what political party that you align with. There's a lot of people that just are steadfast in that and don't always hear the other side. And so we're going to see a lot of this. We have an interview on CNN coming up with Harris Walls, and we had some hints earlier about what they're going to talk about. But there's some tough questions that she needs to answer.
All right. Well, that wraps up the news section. If you are listening to the Ag Tribes Report and during the week you think, hey, this is a story I think should be talked about, go ahead and send it to me on X at Vance Crow or Vance at vancecrow.com. Also, it really helps us out to share the podcast and definitely rate us on Spotify or Apple iTunes, because this podcast is growing really quickly and we'd love to see more people involved in it. Now we're going to move to the Bitcoin land price report. This is where I'm going to ask Tyne, in your county, wherever you live right now, what is an acre of good farmland going for in US dollars?
Really good farmland. I had to ask, okay? I had to text some farmers. Really good farmland, they say, is $15,000 per acre. And Vance, I'm outside of Kansas City. I'm in Missouri. We're in that part where, we get made fun of all the time from farmers in Iowa, farmers in Illinois. We do have some good soil. I'm in the river bottoms area right along the Missouri River. We have some really good productive soil. But $15,000 per acre shocks me. And it also shocks me that we have not seen farmland prices come down as much as we expected. I've done quite a few interviews recently on farmland values, who's buying. You just expect farmers to step away. And we have not seen as many record sales. But we know that one piece of ground that comes up, that farmers are like, listen, this is my one chance to get this piece of farm ground. Then they will pay whatever needs to be paid for that convenience, having that there, that sought after land. But from what I'm hearing from a lot of these realtors and farmland agents is that it's still farmers that are buying. Yes, it may be investors that are bidding. Yes, it may be investors that are driving up the rate of and values of farmland, but it's still farmers that are buying, and that shocks me. And Vance, down the road from us last year, we had a record farmland sale. It was outside of Marshall, Missouri. Malta Bend, Missouri is where it was, and it was unique. I think it went for $30,000 per acre. I'm trying to remember the exact amount, and that was that's like 40 miles from me, not too far, and that was a very special circumstance. That it was not, it wasn't your average farmer that was buying that piece of land.
So if we think about land being priced not in US dollars, because it's hard to know what is a US dollar worth, we like on this show to price it in Bitcoin. And so $15,000 at today's Bitcoin price, which is about $59,300, 0.25 Bitcoin would buy you 1 acre of ground just outside of Kansas City, where Tyne lives. In other words, if you had 1 Bitcoin, you could buy 3.96 acres of farmland where you're at, Tyne. How does that sit with you regarding Bitcoin's price?
I mean, I'm never going to be able to afford Bitcoin is where that sets with me right now. That's what we should have got in a lot earlier is what I'm thinking.
The best part about Bitcoin is you can buy a really tiny amount of it. Whereas with land, if you're only buying it 1 acre at a time, it's hard to make it cash flow. So if you're looking to buy land, maybe a good thing to do is to buy Bitcoin, hope it appreciates relative to land, and then you can buy that land.
Are you getting a commission off of Bitcoin, Vance? Is this your side hustle?
No, my side hustle is I believe if we want to get the bullshit out of ag and stop having our inflation get racked up, we've got to change to a dollar system. They can't print their way out of their problems. All right.
Fair. Very fair, Vance.
Now we are headed to the Peter Thiel paradox. This is where I asked Tyne, what is one thing that you believe that almost nobody in your ag tribe agrees with you on?
Okay. This one's hard, Vance, because as a journalist, I pride myself in keeping politics out of what I do. Okay. So I got an email on Monday from a viewer telling me that he can't believe that I put that convict on our show. And I had to respond back. And I was like, okay, convict, who are you talking about?
Which convict?
Yeah. Like which convict are you talking about? You know, and I knew what he was talking about, but I had, and then I'm like, okay, I don't understand what story are you, and so we try to be middle of the road. I want you to tune in and I don't want you to know how I voted in the last election. I don't want you to know how, what opinion I have on any issue because Vance, I am very opinionated. I just do not give my opinion on the show. I'm a journalist first, a host first. Okay. So my husband, when I asked him about this, he knew exactly what I would say if I was not in the role that I was in. So we're going to keep politics out of it. Okay. So, but mine would be not all media is fake news. Okay. And that is, I know listen, my husband, every day he'll read something or I'll say something and he's like, oh, is that fake news? How do you know that's true? He hassles me all the time about it. Okay. As he should. He is a Texan. He is as opinionated as they come and he likes to give me a hard time. But just because you have seen a headline in one outlet and you feel like they may sway, a little too far left or a little too far right, that's not all of media. And so my thing is, don't cross all of us out just because there's one bad apple in the group. Vance, I get tired of reading all the headlines. I get tired of the news. My husband refuses to pay for television, which is awful job security. Awful job security for the host of a television show. It's true. But I even get tired of it. We turn our television off. We don't watch really television at night. I don't want I like to preserve the innocence of my 8 and 9-year-old. And so we don't watch a lot of the news. I get enough of it at work. I consume enough of it at work. It's all day, every day. And I try to read everything, both sides, so that personally I can form my own opinion. But for work, I am getting all the facts from every single angle. But all I want to say is just don't write off all of the media. Okay. Some of us report on things with no agenda. We just try to report the facts. We will continue to be journalists no matter what happens. We had an argument at the office the other day. What are we? Are we journalists? Are we content providers? And Vance, my response is, I am not a content creator. People on OnlyFans, they call themselves content creators. I am not a content creator. Okay? I am a journalist.
I am definitely clipping that part out.
Listen, Jay told me, he said, well, maybe you could make a little bit more money if you would switch to the other one, but that ain't happening, okay?
Well, I'm going to say that your Peter Thiel, the paradox, I'm going to give you a 6.8 on it because, some people already agree with it, but for delivery, you're getting a 9. That was awesome. All right. To keep on time, we've got to go into the worthy adversaries. This is where I ask our co-hosts to tell me about somebody that they respect, but that they strongly disagree with. We do this because we want to make sure that we're listening to people that challenge our opinions and the way we think about things. So, Tyne, I know this has got to be difficult for you in your role, but who is somebody that you respect but disagree with?
Well, one we actually talked about earlier. So I do have to be careful. I read a lot. I disagree with a lot. I agree with a lot. I also disagree with a lot, but I read it all. I have to, no matter how much it makes my blood boil. And Vance, there's so much that I read today that makes my blood absolutely boil. In fact, Clinton Griffith sometimes will call me on the way into, if I'm on my way into the office, he'll call me. And Chris Bennett does the same thing, which I know he's been on the podcast before, just to get me worked up because they know the points that are just going to make me fired up and I will not stop. So I mentioned Robbie Starbuck. He's just been interesting just to see like who's next. And the amount of information that he's able to get by some of these current employees from some of these companies, I am just mind blown that some of these employees are finding a way to feed Robbie Starbuck information and not get caught. So that and brave enough to do so. So that's been interesting. But mine would be, so Vance, I miss the old ag Twitter. I graduated college in 2008. When I graduated college, I actually went to Monsanto and worked in communications. I was their multimedia specialist. I was ag journalism with an emphasis in broadcast. I did a television story on confined animal feeding operations, the positive of confined animal feeding operations. And basically there was a hit list of people that wanted, I mean, they were after me. The Sierra Club wrote a hit piece on me. I will never forget. My roommates called me and they said, Tyne, just so you know, there's an article about you in the newspaper and it's not good. And so that was kind of my first experience to see that they will personally attack you. So not the job that I was doing, they were personally attacking me. And so that kind of helped create some thick skin. But then when I went over to Monsanto, in those days, I did a lot of social media and I met so many wonderful people on ag Twitter. That was the beauty of it. There were so many wonderful people. And today I feel like, we just, in the world of negativity and the keyboard warriors that are out there, I just feel like we just don't have as much of that good that often gets highlighted. And one that is continuing to do this is a producer out in Southwest Kansas. I actually interviewed him a few months ago, and you'll probably remember the cow 88, number 88, and what he did there. Anyway, Clay Scott, his handle is Scott West Acre. And I just really like what he's doing because not only did he have a tweet on number 88 that went viral, but since Vance, even though number 88's story did not turn out the way that he had hoped, even though they lost her after she gave birth, his tweets are still extremely popular to those outside of ag. And he's using it as a way to educate about ag. And I think we have forgotten that social media can be that tool. You can educate and not be an advocate or whatever word you want to use out there. I know some people don't like those words, but you can still use social media as a tool so that others outside of agriculture view agriculture in a positive light. And I think sometimes we just forget that. Even I forget that. I could do a better job of educating.
Well, that sounds good to me. So tell me the handle again.
At Scott West Acre. Clay Scott is his name, a producer he's a cattle producer, has some row crops too, so he educates on both. But even since number 88 went viral, even since then, I am impressed with some of his tweets and how much interaction he gets and engagement he gets with his tweets still today. Even though number 88, that's no longer what he's tweeting about. He's still educating about ag, and I appreciate what he's doing.
Well, my worthy adversary this week is going to be a guy that goes by at Jeff Murphy 10. And the reason he's a worthy adversary, he is a Kansas cattle rancher. And when I used to get tweets from him, he would cite things about the reason you're wrong is because the Bible says this or the Bible says that, which to me is a really alienating thing. Not that I have any problem with the Bible, but I just think like that's a very difficult way to disagree about popular culture. But I went to an ag day, the stock cropper field day, and I got a chance to meet Jeff. And we were great friends. He had all kinds of super interesting things to say about cattle nutrition and his wife starting up a shop and all these things where I was sitting on Twitter thinking, we are opposites.
Right.
We met and we're brothers. We're close. We had a lot to talk about. So I wanted to throw that out there. Jeff Murphy 10.
How cool is that? I mean, and Vince, I have it quite a bit. I'll have, somebody fire off a message. They're mad at something I reported or, aiming it at me. And then I respond back and, kind of give the other side of it. Well, this is what we were thinking with this. And it's amazing. You respond back and then they write back and they say, well, I didn't mean anything by it. And then sometimes you create this relationship. Those are the best kind.
Absolutely. And you just never know. I mean, I would say, I had a guy and his wife come have dinner at my house with my kids. His wife read books to my kids. How did we meet? I met Jay Curtis on Twitter. So it's like, it
That's
still
awesome.
continues to
Yep.
go. It's amazing.
It is.
All right, Tyne, this has been a wild good ride. You were the first person that's ever pushed me over the 30-minute mark, but I was having so much fun listening to you. I couldn't interrupt. If people wanted to follow you and know more about you, where would they go?
Yeah, I'm on all social media. I'm not good about posting on social media, but I'm on all social media. So at Tyne_ag, you can find me there. And then you can also, if you want to email me, I have farmers email me stories, ideas all the time, and I appreciate that. And it's just tmorgan@farmjournal.com. And I really appreciate those notes because it helps me keep a pulse of what matters most to farmers and ranchers right now.
Well, I thank you so much for coming on. We also want to thank our sponsors, Legacy Interviews, which records people telling their life stories so that future generations can have the opportunity to know their family history, and farmtest.ag, which allows you to test your fungicides, your seeds, different crop systems to know not what the marketing guy is telling you about how good or how efficacious it is, but you can know scientifically verifiably. So go to farmtest.ag to find out more. All right, I'm going to ask you to, once again, if you've liked this, share it with a friend and rate us on your podcast of choice. And we will be back next week with host Greg Gunthorpe, who told me at one point on Twitter, I'm too wild for Vance, I can't handle it. So I am ready to see what this is all about. Thank you so much for coming on. And as always, feel free to disagree.